In 1934, the year the United States was still climbing out of the worst of the Great Depression, a welding company in Cleveland did something that made no financial sense. It had $4 million in sales that year. It handed roughly $132,000 of that money directly to its factory workers as a bonus on top of their regular pay. Across the country, businesses were cutting wages, shedding workers, and shuttering plants. This company gave its money away to the people who ran the machines. 47 years later, in 1981, the same company paid its 2,684 employees a record $59 million in bonuses. That came out to roughly $22,000 per person in a single year, on top of wages that already matched or beat what union shops paid. The company was Lincoln Electric. It made welding machines and the wire and electrodes that feed them. It was not glamorous. It did not advertise on television. Most people have never heard of it. And it is today a $4 billion manufacturer that quietly supplies the equipment holding together a staggering share of the world's bridges, ships, pipelines, and skyscrapers. How does a Cleveland welding shop founded with $200 become the largest arc welding company on earth while paying its workers double the going rate and never laying a single one off for 70 years? The story starts with a motor, not a weld. On December 5, 1995, an engineer named John Cromwell Lincoln founded the Lincoln Electric Company in Cleveland, Ohio. His starting capital was $200, money he had earned designing an electric motor for a chemist named Herbert Dow. John Lincoln was the son of an abolitionist minister and a mother who practiced medicine. He had graduated from Ohio State with a degree in electrical engineering in 1888, and he had trained under Charles Brush, the man who invented the arc light and built America's first electric streetcar. John Lincoln was an inventor first and a businessman a distant second. He held 55 patents over his life. What he wanted was to build his direct current electric motor, a machine he believed ran better than anything else on the market, and sell it to factories that were electrifying as fast as the power lines could reach them. For its first decade and a half, that is what Lincoln Electric did. It made motors. It made battery chargers for the electric automobiles that briefly looked like they might win the early car market. The company was small, the kind of operation that fit inside a few rented rooms on Ontario Street with a workforce you could photograph in a single frame. Then John Lincoln's younger brother arrived, and the company found the business that would define it for the next century. If you're the kind of person who finds these stories worth your time, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. It's how the channel keeps making them. Now back to Cleveland. James Finney. Lincoln joined in 1907. He was 24. He had been studying electrical engineering at Ohio State, the same school his brother attended, but typhoid fever forced him to leave before he finished his degree. He came to work for John as the company's first and only salesman, earning $50 a month plus a 2% commission. The two brothers could not have been more different in temperament. John was the dreamer, happiest at a workbench, indifferent to the daily grind of running a business. James was relentless, organized, and fascinated by the question of how to get human beings to do their best work. John quickly handed his brother the parts of the company he did not want to manage, which turned out to be most of it. James became general manager in 1914 at the age of 31. He would run Lincoln Electric until he died in 1965. The product that changed everything appeared in 1911. The Lincoln brothers built and sold the first variable voltage, single-operator portable arc welding machine in the world. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand how metal was joined before it. The dominant method was riveting. You drilled holes, heated steel pins, and hammered them through overlapping plates to bind them. Riveting was slow, heavy, and it required a small army of workers for any large structure. Arc welding used an electric current to melt metal and fuse two pieces into one continuous piece. It was faster, lighter, and stronger. But early welding equipment was crude and unreliable. The Lincoln machine made the process dependable enough to be used in real industrial work, and it could be carried to the job rather than bolted to a factory floor. By 1922, Lincoln Electric was selling more welders than motors. The company had found its life's work. Getting industry to trust the new method was its own battle. Engineers had spent their careers designing for rivets, and they did not believe a welded joint could hold the way a riveted one did. A weld looked like a bead of metal laid along a seam. A rivet looked solid. Convincing a bridge engineer or a shipbuilder to bet a structure on welds took more than a sales pitch. It took proof, and it took numbers to back the proof. Lincoln Electric set out to provide both. In 1929, the company joined other welding firms to run advertisements in magazines like Time and Business Week, aimed not at welders, but at the bosses who signed off on construction methods. The message was that welding was faster, cheaper, and strong enough to trust. The company patented a flux that made a weld as flexible as the steel around it, removing the brittleness that had made early welds suspect. Welding a good seam required more than a machine. It required the right electrode, the metal rod that melts into the joint and becomes part of the weld. In 1927, Lincoln Electric introduced the fleet weld coated electrode. Earlier electrodes were bare metal wire. The fleet weld rod was coated in a chemical flux that shielded the molten weld from the air as it cooled, and the difference in the result was not subtle. Welds made with the coated electrode had 20 to 50% higher tensile strength and a 100% greater ductility than welds made with bare wire. They were stronger, and they bent without cracking. That single product carried Lincoln Electric through the Great Depression and into the Second World War. The same year the fleet weld electrode appeared, James Lincoln began publishing the knowledge behind it. In 1933, the company put out the first edition of its procedure handbook of arc welding design and manufacturing. It was a manual that taught engineers and welders how to actually use the process correctly. It became known across the trade as the Bible of welding. It is still in print, now in its 13th edition, nearly a century later. In 1917, the company had already opened the Lincoln Electric Welding School, which would go on to train more than 100,000 people and become the longest continuously operating welding school in the world. Lincoln did not just sell the tool. It taught the entire industry how to use the tool, and in doing so, it made arc welding the standard method of joining metal and made itself the name attached to that standard. But the part of Lincoln Electric that turned business school professors into lifelong students of the company was never the welding equipment. It was how James Lincoln treated the people who built it. James Lincoln came to a conclusion early that most industrialists of his era would have called naive. He believed that a worker who was paid for exactly what he produced, who shared in the company's profits, and who could not be fired in a downturn, would outproduce any worker laboring under fear or a flat hourly wage. He built a system around that belief over 4 decades and called it incentive management. It had several parts that locked together. The first part was piecework. Production workers at Lincoln were not paid by the hour. They were paid for each acceptable piece they made. There was no ceiling. A fast, skilled worker could earn far more than the regional union wage, and many did. There was one catch that made the system honest. If a piece failed for quality reasons, the worker fixed it on his own time. The incentive was not just to work fast. It was to work fast and well, because sloppy work cost the worker directly. The second part was the bonus. Starting in 1934, Lincoln set aside a large share of its annual profits and distributed it to employees as a year-end bonus based on individual merit. The amounts were enormous by factory standards. Over the decades, the bonus often equaled or exceeded a worker's entire base pay for the year, effectively doubling their income. The merit rating that determined each person's share was based on output, quality, ideas, and dependability. When the company made no profit, there was no bonus. When it made a great deal, there was no upper limit. The money flowed to the floor. The third part was the advisory board. James Lincoln organized it in 1914, and it still meets today. Workers elected representatives from each department, and those representatives sat down with top management every 2 weeks. They could complain, criticize, propose changes, and question decisions. Management did not have to accept every suggestion, but it had to listen, and it had to explain itself. For a manufacturing company in the early 20th century, that degree of give and take between the shop floor and the executive office was almost unheard of. The fourth part was the one that drew the most attention, and it grew out of a problem the other three created. If you pay workers for every piece they make, and you reward them for finding faster ways to make those pieces, you run into a fear as old as the factory itself. A worker who automates his own job, who finds a way to do in 1 hour what used to take 3, has just made himself less necessary. Why would anyone do that if the reward for efficiency was unemployment? James Lincoln's answer was guaranteed employment. If you knew your job was safe, he reasoned, you would embrace every new method and machine instead of fighting it. Lincoln began the practice informally in the late 1940s and made it official company policy in 1958. Any worker who passed a trial period, eventually set at 3 years, was guaranteed continuous work. The company could shorten hours and reassign people to different jobs, but it would not lay anyone off for lack of business. Lincoln Electric has not laid off a single covered employee in its American operations for that reason since 1948. That is more than 75 years. The results of the system were almost hard to believe. Between 1932 and 1943, worker productivity at Lincoln increased nearly 13 times. The labor needed to build a 200-amp welding machine dropped from about 113 hours in 1921 to roughly 16 hours by 1944. The price of that machine fell from $1,500 to $200. Lincoln was paying its workers roughly double the average industrial wage and still undercutting every competitor on price because the workers themselves kept finding ways to make the product cheaper without making it worse. They had every reason to. They kept the gains. A worker who invented a faster jig or a better fixture was not handing free money to a distant shareholder. He was raising his own piece rate and his own bonus, and he was protected by the promise that the efficiency he created would never be the reason he lost his job. The incentives all pointed the same direction, and they pointed there for everyone on the floor at once. When the Second World War came, the demand for welding exploded. The American shipbuilding effort needed to produce vessels faster than anyone had ever built ships, and the answer was to weld hulls together instead of riveting them. Liberty ships, the cargo vessels that carried supplies across the Atlantic, were welded at a pace that riveting could never have matched. Lincoln Electric's machines and electrodes were at the center of that effort, and the company's welders helped build the program that kept the Allied supply lines open. The war turned arc welding from a promising industrial method into the obvious one. After 1945, the world built with welds. The company's generosity during the war did attract a different kind of attention. Lincoln's bonus payments on government war contracts were so large that they raised suspicions in Washington. In 1942, the House Naval Affairs Committee investigated the company, and in 1943, a federal board questioned whether the bonuses were appropriate on government work. James Lincoln, who was a vocal critic of the New Deal and a defender of individual initiative, defended his system fiercely. The company kept paying the bonus. John C. Lincoln died in 1959 at the age of 92. James Lincoln died in 1965 at 82, having run the company for more than half a century. When he died, plenty of observers assumed the strange system he had built would die with him, that the next generation of managers would quietly replace it with something more conventional. They were wrong. William Irgong, who had started at Lincoln on the assembly line, became chairman and kept the system intact. So did everyone who followed. The true measure of what James Lincoln built was that it survived him by decades and kept working. The system faced its hardest domestic test in the early 1980s. A severe recession hit American manufacturing, and Lincoln's traditional markets collapsed. Company revenues dropped 40% from $450 million in 1981 to $220 million in 1982. This was the moment that the no layoff promise either meant something or did not. Lincoln did not lay anyone off. Instead, the company reassigned about 15% of its workforce. Production workers who had no welders to build did plant maintenance. Some took clerical jobs. Some were handed sales territories and sent out on the road to sell the very machines they normally made. Average pay was cut roughly in half, from $44,000 to $22,000, and executives took cuts too. But every worker who met the company's standards kept a job. The company stayed profitable, and it still paid a bonus. The workers had agreed to flexibility in exchange for security, and both sides held up their end. Through all of this, the company kept inventing. In 1951, Lincoln built a modern plant in Euclid, Ohio, with material handling systems that few factories of the era could match, and it moved its production there from the Cleveland site it had outgrown. The 1950s brought two products that mattered as much to professional welders as the original fleet weld electrode had. The jet weld electrodes were a fast-fill, low-hydrogen line that let welders lay down metal quickly while avoiding the cracking that hydrogen caused in critical joints. The inner shield self-shielded flux-cored wire did something different and harder. It carried its own shielding chemistry inside a continuous tubular wire, so a welder could work outdoors in wind without the gas shielding that other methods needed blowing away. For pipeline crews and construction welders working in the open, that was the difference between a usable process and a useless one. James Lincoln also held a belief shared by the managers who followed him, that the company should keep its product line narrow and simply outbuild everyone in that narrow space. Lincoln did not chase every adjacent market. It made welding machines, the wire and electrodes that fed them, and the motors it had started with. It got better at those things every year and let competitors spread themselves thin. If the recession proved the system worked under pressure at home, the next decade proved it could not simply be exported. By the mid-1980s, Lincoln's leaders looked at a slowing American market and the rise of foreign competition and decided the company had to become a global power. Between 1986 and 1991, under CEO George Willis, Lincoln went on an acquisition spree. It bought or built plants in Mexico, Brazil, Venezuela, Japan, Germany, Norway, Spain, the Netherlands, and elsewhere, spending around $325 million and taking on enormous debt to do it. Long-term debt climbed from $17.5 million in 1988 to over $220 million by 1993. The company that had operated for 90 years on the principle of no debt was suddenly buried in it. The problem was not just the borrowing. Lincoln's executives assumed that incentive management, the system that had made the Cleveland plant a marvel, would work anywhere. They expected their new plants in Germany and Brazil to adopt piecework bonuses and advisory boards, and to produce the same results. It did not happen. Labor laws were different. Cultural attitudes toward piecework and individual competition were different. In some countries, paying workers a bonus for outproducing their peers ran against everything the local labor system was built on. The European operations bled money. When Donald Hastings became chairman and CEO in July 1992, he learned within his first half hour on the job that the company was at risk of defaulting on its loans and missing the annual bonus for the first time in nearly 60 years. For a company whose entire culture rested on that bonus, that was an existential threat. Hastings made a hard decision. He wrote off most of the failed European operations. He pushed the American plants, the ones that actually worked, to ramp up production and sales as hard as they could to generate the cash to keep paying the domestic bonus and service the debt. The American workers responded the way the system was designed to make them respond. They produced. In 1995, on its 100th anniversary, Lincoln Electric listed on the Nasdaq stock exchange and raised about $81 million by selling 12% of its equity to the public, using the money to pay down the debt from the foreign misadventure. The company survived. It kept paying the bonus, and it learned a lesson it never forgot, that its culture was a genuine competitive advantage at home and a fragile thing that could not be airlifted into a foreign factory and expected to take root. The Lincoln that came out the other side of the 1990s expanded internationally again, but carefully this time, with managers who understood local conditions and with no illusion that the Cleveland playbook would work unchanged everywhere. The strategy worked. The company grew steadily through the following decades, adding plasma cutting, robotic welding systems, automated assembly, and brazing and soldering alloys to a product line that had once been almost entirely welders and electrodes. It acquired companies that fit, including the brazing specialist J.W. Harris in 2005, and integrated them without repeating the old mistakes. Today, Lincoln Electric Holdings is headquartered in Euclid, Ohio, just outside Cleveland, on the same ground it moved to in 1951. In 2024, it reported net sales of $4 billion. It operates dozens of manufacturing locations across roughly 20 countries and sells into more than 160. It employs around 12,000 people. It is traded on the Nasdaq under the symbol LICO, and it is the world leader in arc welding, the company that engineers and builds a larger share of professional welding equipment than anyone else on the planet. Its products are in the shipyards, the pipelines, the auto plants, the construction sites, and the fabrication shops where steel gets joined into the physical world people live in. The advisory board, James Lincoln, created in 1914, still meets. The bonus first paid in 1934 is still paid, and in recent good years, it has still added tens of thousands of dollars to a typical worker's income. The piecework system still rewards the fast and the careful. The guaranteed employment policy that took hold in 1948 has still never been broken in the company's American operations. A factory worker in Cleveland in 2026 is working under a system that was, in its essentials, finished before his grandparents were born, and it still produces the same result. People who work at Lincoln tend to stay for their entire careers, and they tend to make more than they could anywhere else doing the same work. John C. Lincoln wanted to build a better motor and ended up funding the company with $200 and an invention. James F. Lincoln took the welding business his brother stumbled into and spent 50 years proving that a company could pay its workers more than anyone else, charge its customers less than anyone else, refuse to fire people in bad times, and still beat every competitor in the market. The two brothers were sons of a minister who raised them on the golden rule, and James turned that idea into a balance sheet. The company nearly destroyed itself only once, and it did so by forgetting that the thing which made it special was not a machine or a patent. It was a bargain between the people who owned the company and the people who built its products, struck in Cleveland and honored for a century. Lincoln Electric never licensed its name to a foreign maker. It never sold itself to a conglomerate. It never abandoned the city where it started. It just kept making welders, kept paying the bonus, and kept its end of the deal. If you made it this far, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. and take a look at the two videos on your screen right now. Both are companies that built something the same way Lincoln did, quietly and over decades, and I think you'll want to see how they pulled it off.